Thanks, Tim, for that introduction. Can everyone hear me all right? Great. Hi, everybody online. I guess I should point myself that way. It's wonderful to be back. I was here for the grand celebration of the new space here, the new temple. It's beautiful to see it being used and filled with Dharma energy that each of you is bringing with you this morning. So today, what I'd like to talk about are the ways that my life, the life of both a long-time student of Zen and the life of a person with chronic illness, have circled around one another, informed each other, danced with each other, sometimes seemed at odds with each other. And I want to talk about energy and faith and the healing power of the Dharma. So if you're thinking, well, I don't have anything wrong with me, why am I sitting in this Dharma talk? Well, for one thing, we're all temporarily abled, so some of this may be helpful down the road. But also, we're all engaged in this question of how do I practice wholeheartedly with the circumstances of my life? So I'm hoping it will be relevant to all of you in one way or another. But first, I want to talk about salmon. So I live now, as you heard, in Port Angeles on the Olympic Peninsula. And the Sol Duck River is pretty close to me in the Olympic National Park. Anybody been to the Sol Duck? You've been there? Yeah, it's a great place. And I was there a couple months ago, actually, with my friend from Bellingham, Katie Beck. And we went for a walk through the mossy forest to this wonderful spot where you can look over the river at a cascades, small cascades, it's not the big Sol Duck waterfall, and see the salmon coming upstream. So this is where they're coho, and you look down into this pool, and it's just filled with these big, dark shapes in the pool, and they're all lined up, pointing upstream. And one of the things that was quite moving is that there were a number of people there that day, and it was like being in a zendo or a church. It was so quiet. Everybody was completely focused on this beautiful miracle that was happening in front of them. Because what had to happen, and you could tell it was one by one, each fish would approach this kind of series of cascades, and they would make this giant leap to try to get over the first set of rocks. And most of the time they didn't make it, and they fell back. And then they'd try again. And eventually they'd get over that first set of white water, and there was a little pool that they could rest there before they went on to the next one. It was really incredibly moving, and of course they're returning to where they began years before they were out in the ocean, and also where they're going to die. And yet they're giving their whole life force, everything they have, to go up the river. And yes, they die, but of course with their death, they feed the forest. This is one of the things we know now, is that they bring all these nutrients from where they've been in the ocean back to the place that they came from. So there are two Sanskrit words that are going to run through my talk today. One is virya, and the other one is shraddha. Some of you may have heard of virya, but I'll be talking. Virya is usually translated as energy, and shraddha is faith. So I feel like the coho are expressing both virya and shraddha, and we can learn from them. And also, of course, I've come back home too. I'm so glad to be back. I was gone for 8 years to the Midwest to help my mother through the end of her life, and then I was able to come back home to my true home. So it's great to be back. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about my story, and not in a whole lot of detail. but just to give you a sense of this question that in my own life about how to practice with the circumstances of a particular life. So when I lived here in Bellingham, which was about 1987 to 1998 or so, I was a healthy young adult, healthy young person, at least relatively so, practicing, loving my life, living out in the county, living on Lummi Island for some of that time, married, whole life. And then in 1988, 1999, it all fell apart very dramatically. First marriage and being here, and then my health. And I went through this really long time where I actually, as this often happens to people at the beginning of chronic illness, for one thing, they don't know it's chronic. Because I had a kind of relapse remitting pattern. So I would feel horrible. It started with a very bad case of mononucleosis. So I just thought I was recovering from that. And I'd get better. And I'd like, oh, great. I'm back to the life of a person in their mid-30s. And then it would hit again. And it took about 2 years to realize, oh, this is actually my life now. This is what it looks like. And that went on for a long time and had very profound effects on what my life looked like compared to what I was also a field biologist before that, and I lost a lot of capacity, and I also could never trust what condition I would be in from one day to the next. Talk about working with impermanence. I got a big crash course in impermanence. And I was actually, so Tim and I sewed our first ocases. We started our very first priest ocases. Actually, we did Jukai together, lay ordination. Then we sewed our first priest robes together, and then my life fell apart. So I couldn't, for a lot of that time, even though I love this practice with all my heart, I could not sustain my health in any kind of formal Zen practice. So I had spent time practicing at San Francisco Zen Center, in practice periods, sesshins, practicing with Norman Fisher. And even if I tried to do a sesshin, I wouldn't make it through. I would get very sick in the middle of it and have to leave. So this was a real quandary. Here, I love this practice, right? All this virya, all this energy for the practice, but not the physical capacity to actually be in formal practice. So one of the things I think a lot about is creativity and our creative response to our circumstances. So one of the things I realized was, well, I'm still devoted to the Dharma, so how, and I love to be on retreat, how can I do this? And actually, I have to give a big shout out to Jean LaValle, who some of you may know. She is one of the leaders of the Bellingham Insight Meditation group that sits here too. And Jean, and I think it was her idea, came up with the idea that we could just do a retreat, the two of us. Go and rent a place, be in silence, cook for one another, and then just have big blocks of time where whatever the practice was that each one of us wanted to do at that time or could do, that's what they do. So that might be, for her, that might be sitting and walking in the kind of traditional Vipassana meditation way. For me, it might be a little bit of sitting and 2 hours in bed in a mindful, silent way. And so we found ways for me to continue to practice. And I went back, I had originally been a Vipassana student, I went back, I realized I could do long retreats in an environment where I could, again, do what I needed to do to take care of my body. So that's how I kept finding my way forward over those big rocks, over the white water of my life, and over my the circumstances of being chronically ill. And then this often happens. I often say with autoimmune, it did turn out it was an autoimmune illness. With autoimmune illnesses, you tend to collect them over a lifetime, which is what happened to me. And in 2021, I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, which can, of course, be a utterly debilitating and crippling illness. And I had been quite well for a long time. I'd kind of gone into remission from my previous thing, but that was another big blow. And I'm happy to say that currently I am in remission from rheumatoid arthritis. So I get to go back and forth between what I imagine it feels like to be a very old person with very limited mobility and a lot of fatigue, to actually somebody who can do a lot of things, even though I have to always be looking at how am I spending my energy? How am I taking care of myself? That's one of my practices now. But I'm so grateful every single day. I wish we could all be like this before we get to the place where this isn't true for us. I am grateful every day when I can get out of bed, walk to the kitchen, make myself a cup of tea, go for a walk around the block, or be in the forest, which is one of my favorite things to do, knowing that I might wake up one morning and none of those things are possible for me. So it's good to live with this kind of gratitude. So I was lucky in a way that when I first became ill, right before I became ill, I had the chance to study a little tiny bit with a woman who is a priest at San Francisco Zen Center and a teacher, Darlene Cohen. And Darlene wrote a wonderful book called Turning Suffering Inside Out. Darlene had severe rheumatoid arthritis that she developed in the 1970s when the drugs that are available now were not available, which meant that there was tremendous permanent damage to many of the joints in her body. So she lived in searing pain. But she took that pain. She took her life eventually. I mean, she was 31 years old and had a 1-year-old child when it hit. But she took the circumstances of her life, and that's where she taught from. That was the gift that she offered to others, was, what does it mean to live a life in this kind of pain? How do you practice with this kind of pain? And she ran these wonderful groups called Suffering and Delight. And it just happened that a few weeks before I caught mononucleosis, or caught Epstein-Barr, I took a workshop with her at San Francisco Zen Center on this question of how to work with pain and illness, for which I am eternally grateful. And then I got to spend time with her later in my life as well. So really, she's been a great inspiration to me. And partly because of that, about 3 years ago, San Francisco Zen Center asked me if I wanted, or if I was interested in teaching classes. Darlene passed away now a number of years ago. Whether I wanted to teach classes on practicing spiritual practices for chronic pain and illness. And so I've been doing that ever since, which initially was a little daunting. Like, oh my goodness, what kind of suffering am I going to meet? And there is a lot of suffering in these, because people come with everything imaginable, including terminal illnesses and tremendous pain and suffering. But we form a community, and it's really beautiful. There's an ongoing group as well, and I learned from them, and they learned from me, and we practice together. So I feel like I'm keeping Darlene Cohen's work. That she had Dharma heirs as well, and a number of them, and wonderful people, are also keeping her work going. But in this particular way, this is what I'm bringing. So I want to get back to this virya, virya and shraddha, energy and faith and determination. So I also teach through Upaya Zen Center in New Mexico, mostly online, and I take care of the people who primarily participate online, which, by the way, a number of those people also have some kind of physical condition that means that they can't actually practice in person there. So there's a big group of people, and we study something for a full year in small groups. And last year was the paramitas, which are sometimes translated as perfections. I don't think that's a great translation. They're more like the qualities of the bodhisattva is the way I like to think of the paramitas. And one of them is this virya, which the energy. And one of my favorite translations is joyful effort rather than energy, because of course some of us don't have that much energy, but we might have a lot of joyful effort. And Joan Halifax translates virya as wholeheartedness. And I think we're all capable of wholeheartedness, whatever our conditions. So I really like wholeheartedness. This is the fourth of the paramitas. So if you've ever read Norman Fisher's book, The World Could Be Otherwise, it's all about the paramitas. And so he goes through each one. And this is sort of sweet what he writes. Virya is most often translated as energy or even zest. It implies irrepressibility. The bodhisattva commitment is endless. The bodhisattva job goes on, and the bodhisattva's love and desire to be of service to others is limitless. In order to keep on with the work, bodhisattvas practice the perfection of joyful effort. So, I don't know if you are aware of this, but you're practicing virya right now by being here. You're practicing virya when you get up early on a Sunday morning, and instead of going out for pancakes, you came here and you sat and you helped take care of the temple, and you're here now listening to this talk. This is all expression of virya. We practice virya when we take on the commitment of doing a practice period or a sesshin, especially that first time when it's so scary. Or when we wholeheartedly weed a garden or sit by the bedside of a dying person. This is all, it takes tremendous virya to do that. We cultivate virya in just in showing up. Sometimes Norman used to say, that's all of it. That's our whole practice, just showing up. Even this sitting upright, the kind of strong back and soft belly, is cultivating virya. But virya is a double-edged sword, as in some ways are all of the paramitas, because we live in a culture that absolutely valorizes busyness, effort, doing, rather than being. And so one of the things, that kind of emphasis, if this kind of doing emphasis, actually is what can often lead to physical challenges. And physical challenges really knock that identity out from under you, which is one of the reasons I've had to really find for myself, what does wholeheartedness mean if I can't do the things that other people can do? So I want to say just a tiny bit about this other word, shraddha, or faith. So faith is considered one of the 5 powers. I don't know if you noticed when we chanted earlier, when we chanted the Fukan Zazengi, there was a line about supernatural powers, and you might have been like, I didn't know that was a thing in Zen, supernatural powers. The Buddha actually did talk about supernatural powers. But there are also the maybe less supernatural powers, but powers nonetheless in the Dharma. And there are 5 of them. And one of them is this faith, or shraddha. And faith, again, is kind of a funny word, right? We don't think of faith in the context of Buddhism. But this is not faith in some divine figure, just as when we bow to the altar, we're not bowing to divinity. We're actually bowing to this possibility of awakening that is within everything and all of us. No, this faith, I think, is more about these questions. Do I have faith in my capacity to practice and to keep going? Do I have some faith in the teachings themselves, even if I don't fully understand them, and none of us fully understand them? Well, maybe there's someone, but most people. And I think, do I have faith in a sangha? Do I have faith in a teacher? But again, not a blind faith, but a willingness. The faith that there's a beautiful line from a David Whyte poem where he says, "My faith is like the little tiny crescent of a moon, right? After the new moon. That's all the faith I have." And I think it's enough to have that much faith. So I feel like faith and energy really go together, because that little tiny bit of faith, right, gives us this determination, a quality of not giving up, despite all the ups and downs of life and practice, and challenges, and what seem like barriers. So I always feel like if you're giving a Zen talk, you should bring up a koan. So I'll bring up a koan that's actually related to this. This is from the Blue Cliff record. It's case number 87. Yunmen said to the assembly, "Medicine and sickness cure each other. The whole earth is medicine. What is the self?" So there's a really great, so in these big collections of koans, there are commentaries. And sometimes the commentaries are even more interesting than the koan. And I just want to share a little of part of the commentary because I think it's so great. So Manjushri, who I think is on the altar behind me here, one of the smaller figures with the sword. Isn't there a Manjushri back there? Yep. There's always a Manjushri or almost always on a Zen altar. So this is a story about Manjushri, the bodhisattva of wisdom, and Sudana, who was one of the is actually a character in one of the Mahayana sutras, a pilgrim, actually. One day, Manjushri ordered Sudana to pick medicinal herbs. He said, "If there is something that is not medicine, bring it to me." Sudana searched all over, but there was not one thing that was not medicine. So that's pretty interesting. Is the whole earth medicine for us? For whatever our individual struggle is, our individual suffering? Can you find something that is not medicine? Is illness itself maybe a kind of medicine? Although I often say, you might never want, and I think if I have time, I'm going to share a little bit from the book. You might not, I always suggest that you never say to anybody else that their illness is a gift. However, you might decide yourself that it's true for you. So I also wanted to just mention there's another wonderful Mahayana sutra called the Vimalakirti Sutra. And that's about a layperson, an enlightened layperson. Very inspiring guy, actually. And it's funny and wild, and it's one of my favorite Mahayana sutras. And it actually starts with Vimalakirti being sick. And the Buddha, like a good, minister, says, well, somebody needs to go visit Vimalakirti, make a visit to him because he's sick. And nobody wants to go because he's so wise, and that whenever any of these great bodhisattvas and disciples of the Buddha have gone to see him in the past, they've always ended up embarrassed. So nobody wants to go see him. And finally, Manjushri, same guy, right? Wisdom bodhisattva, says, well, I'll go. And everybody else goes along because they want to see what will happen. And so Manjushri goes to this little tiny sick room. So if any of you have ever had an interview with a teacher, with Tim or somebody else, you're usually in a little tiny room. Well, supposedly, that's Vimalakirti's room. It's actually called that, like the abbot's quarters in the monastery. It's Vimalakirti's room. And so it was really, really tiny. But somehow the entire several hundred people that were there with the Buddha who wanted to see what was going to happen, they all fit in the room. So you can think about that for a while. But one of the things that Vimalakirti says, what Manjushri asks about how he's doing, and he says, well, I'm sick because all beings are sick. Until all beings are not sick, I will be sick, which is part of the bodhisattva way, right? That we're in it together. It's not like some of us are sick and some of us aren't. No, we're all working with something in our lives. And in the earlier form of Buddhism, Theravadan Buddhism, but we sometimes say these also in some Zen places, these are said, there are these 5 remembrances that are said, sometimes every day, and they're really great. My friend James Ford, who's a Zen teacher, any sangha that he's part of, he has everybody chant that every time they're chant these. We're going to do it. We're going to do a call and response here in a minute. So, and he says there is nothing he does with people that brings up more resistance than the remembrances. And we're just going to do the first three. So, I'll say them. You say them back to me, okay? I am of the nature to become old. I am of the nature to become sick. I am of the nature to die. Imagine if you reminded yourself of these every single day. It's like, you know, what's written on the han, that, you know, the wooden drum that you hear that calls us into the hall. It's a reminder that this is the truth of things. Let's practice. Let's bring that wholeheartedness to our life. So, just to coming here to the end, you know, I would say that what Darlene Cohen taught me, and that has been so important to me and that I try to pass on to other people through how she lived her life and her teachers, is and her teaching, is that take what is hardest in your life and make a gift of it to others, actually. And also, most importantly, love the life you have. Not the life that you used to have, or maybe the life that you'll have someday, but this life, whatever is in it, it's all medicine. It's all medicine. So, as some of you know, so this is the book, Tend to Your Spirit. I'm very happy with it. Mindful Living with Chronic Illness. I'm one of the co-authors of the book. I like to do things collaboratively. And this book is full of spiritual practices related to living a life with chronic illness or pain. And I'm doing a book reading this afternoon, but some of you probably would like to go home. Maybe you'll have your pancakes later in the day. I don't know. So I do have books available if you'd like to. They're by donation. If you would like to take one home, and I can sign it for you afterwards. But I just thought I would read one little section of it. So each chapter is on a different aspect, a different like spiritual aspect, an emotional aspect of living with chronic illness or pain. And there's 16 chapters. The very last chapter is acceptance. So if you ever think that you should be accepting, like right at the beginning of something, no. It's a long journey to acceptance. We alternated chapters, and so there's an essay by one or the other of us in each chapter, and I wrote this one. And it's called, Can I Love the Life I Have? So some of this will sound familiar from what I just said. Earlier this summer, I was struck by the realization that it has been exactly 25 years that chronic illness has been powerfully shaping my life. That's a quarter of a century. In fact, my first autoimmune illness began in the last century. If illness was a child, they'd be out of the house, I hope, by now, and working somewhere, renting an apartment. Instead, chronic illness lives in this body, sometimes at the wheel of the car and determining the direction of my life, sometimes sitting in the back seat, temporarily quiescent, like a child looking out the window. And then I talked about, this wonderful thing of being able to actually do things. Like I had driven from the Midwest to California and back and up to the Pacific Northwest. And to be able to do that was just such an enormous gift. There is tremendous humility in living a life so marked by chronic illness. I've had to learn to respond with compassion to the requests of the body, to treat the body as a partner rather than an enemy. This is most true when the lights go dark and we are once again whirling into the territory of pain and weakness. It's easy to fight and resist, but I've learned the hard way how resistance increases the suffering. Instead, there has to be a kind of surrender, The body is firmly in the lead, and my job is to follow it. That's what this partner has taught me. I now recognize that pride is a big part of my personality. There's nothing like a good illness to help you release a little excess pride. Proud of your dependability? Illness makes you undependable. Proud of your self-sufficiency? Illness forces you to ask for help. Proud of your career? Illness may very well undermine whatever career you have. We're taught in Buddhism that the degree of suffering is directly related to the degree of holding on. Despite this teaching, most of us don't let go of anything very easily. Illness, like a new puppy who chews anything and everything in sight, helps us get rid of things we thought we needed, but really didn't. Somehow, miraculously, every time I lose some part of my self-image, something fresh and beautiful comes my way. Because of this illness, I'm way less impressive, but there's more room for grace. So, acceptance has meant to me over these years seeing both my times of health and my times of fatigue and pain as the life I have. I now see this particular life as a long dance with illness, though it wasn't the dance I would have chosen. Nonetheless, it has led me in life-giving directions. I am grateful for my times of relative well-being over these 25 years, though I never take them for granted. I know that physical well-being, like everything else in life, is impermanent, maybe especially impermanent in my case, and I allow myself grief when life is harder. But I have also learned that there can be plenty of joy, plenty of beauty, plenty of spiritual deepening, even then. In writing this book, Julianne and I have hoped to give you a taste of these possibilities and resources for your own journey through chronic illness and pain. So we don't have a lot of time, but I think we have a few minutes if there's something on your mind that you just want to bring up.
And here we can also include the folks on Zoom if you want to say anything. And so that they can hear us, we'll need to pass around the microphone. And we